2, 1. Welcome all. I'm here with Jerry Kilby, and we're in the 10th in a series of AGIF sustainability webinars. In the past months, every week, we've delivered webinars on turf and club management with the industry leaders to supply career building information to professionals in Asia. The Asian Golf Industry Federation is a not-for-profit membership federation comprised of suppliers and facilities in the turf, club, and sports industry. And the Federation focuses on building sustainable practices, both in terms of environmental and economic aspects throughout the Asia Pacific region. We believe strongly in the development of sustainable industry, and it's the education and empowerment of the professionals in the industry that make this possible. And that's why we run webinars like this one today. We have developed the AGIF certificate in greenskeeping, which is supported by the RNA and 5 AGIF member organizations. The CIG focuses on developing the skill set of greenkeeper turf professionals throughout Asia. We also focus on club management education as the partner of the Club Management Association of America, and we've rolled out education in Asia for the pathway to the Certified Club Manager degree. The CCM is considered the gold standard in club management industry globally, and managers in Asia now can achieve the necessary education here in Asia as a result of this partnership with the CMAE. It is vital to have strong partners in implementing education throughout Asia, and our education is recognized for credits by the PGA of America, the PGA of GB in Ireland, the PGA of Australia, the PGA of Japan, the Club Management Association of America, and the GCSAA. Due to travel restrictions from COVID-19 pandemic, webinars are the only way we can continue to deliver education at the moment. We'll resume event education when travel restrictions ease, and we'll keep you posted as this develops. Over the last few months, we have spent a lot of time improving our digital offering and membership benefits. For more information, please log on to www.agif.asia, as well as our LinkedIn and Facebook company pages. Please also sign up for our weekly newsletter to join the over 10,000 industry contacts and receiving weekly industry updates. Lastly, the AGIF is a not-for-profit federation, and now more than ever, we rely upon membership dues to operate. So if you like what we're doing and you feel that your company or facility might benefit from exposure that you will get through the AGIF, please note that our membership benefits are substantial and can be seen on our website under AGIF membership benefits. Please take a look. And if you are already an AGIF member, thank you. Your ongoing support is greatly appreciated. On to some housekeeping issues. Jerry will present on the topic for roughly 60 minutes, and we will have 30 minutes of that after Q&A. The chat buttons are on throughout, so please feel free to ask questions, which we can then voice to Jerry during the Q&A session. Now on to the main event and to introduce our speaker. For most of his working life, Jerry Kilby has held several senior management roles in golf industry, including marketing manager of the PGA of GB in Ireland and chief executive officer of the Club Managers Association of Europe, the CMAE. In addition, Jerry has been general manager of 3 golf clubs, 2 of which were in the UK and 1 in Dubai. Jerry is one of the first club managers in Europe to achieve the CCM, the Certified Club Manager status. He has had numerous articles published in golf trade publications, and he has presented at conferences, workshops, and seminars in the UK, Europe, and Middle East over the last 14 years. Having traveled the world in recent years, his network of golf industry colleagues is unrivaled, and he uses this network continuously to improve his knowledge, learn new ideas, and to understand better how technology and other innovations can help golf clubs and the wider golf industry grow and develop in the years to come. Jerry's been too modest. He's a veteran of the industry and very well known. And Jerry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Eric. Nice to be called a veteran. Good start. Excellent. Well, yeah, and it is true. I suppose I have been around quite a lot. It's 35 years ago that I first entered the golf industry with the PGA in the UK, and the industry has been fantastic to me. It's been taking me around the world and brought me to Asia on a number of occasions, and I thoroughly enjoyed. Eric and I, before the webinar started, we were chatting about my days in Kuala Lumpur with the Malaysian Golf Association, where I was tournament director of their Open for 5 years, and in Hong Kong. I understand delegates from both countries are online, so if any of my friends from either of those countries are there, hi, lovely to see you, and thanks for coming in. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and then we'll go from there. So one thing I would say before we start is as Eric said, please use the Q&A to ask questions at any time. Eric will interrupt me if he feels there's a question pertaining to a topic that we're discussing at any time. I've asked Eric not to necessarily save the questions all for the end, but of course we can wrap it all up at the end by picking up any questions that anybody has. So let me just do this 1 second. There we are. Hope everybody can see that okay. Eric, is that clear? That's good. Excellent. Thank you. Right. So this is where we'll start. This is the title of today's thing. And I'm grateful to Eric for a career summary and the short bio before we started. But there we are. That's the sort of things I've been doing over the years. So that's a little bit about me. I've split this webinar into 2 parts. Why is governance important? And then I'll go through what I call the 4 key components of good governance and how they apply. So in the first section, let's just talk for a few minutes about what do I mean by governance. And sometimes this is misunderstood a little bit. So I'm hoping that people will pretty much understand where I'm coming from if I say that really, for me, governance is about how the club, how the business makes its decisions. A process should exist that means that the club and as a business functions where the right people make the right decisions armed with the information they need to make those decisions. So it is a question that is vital. You're not going to progress. You're not going to be able to fulfill your objectives. You're not going to be able to grow as a business if you don't continue to make decisions. Some of those are tough. But right now, with COVID in different stages all the way around the world, there are some very difficult decisions people have to make. The governance structure should reflect the fact that the right people in the organization are making the decisions, and they should be doing so with the right information at their fingertips, with making the informed decisions. I call it the engine that keeps the club moving forward. The governance is the engine. And although there's a formal definition there for everybody to see, I actually think that governance is actually one of the biggest issues affecting golf clubs right now. It prevents good facilities progressing, and it allows those that want to change and want to move, it allows them to do so. And so, it is a very, very important subject that, frequently a failing business, a club that's struggling, or a golf resort that's not attracting the visitors that they want to, you could trace many of the decisions that have led to that situation back to poor governance, in my opinion. It's not always the case, but many of the issues could have been solved with better decision making. Now we know that there are effectively only 2 types of clubs, the equity and the non-equity clubs. But what I am going to outline here, I believe applies to them both. But it's worth saying that there are differences, of course. And in an equity club, it would be a committee potentially, or a board of directors who are elected by the membership. So in that circumstance, you have a slightly different governance model than you would do in a commercial outfit, where effectively the shareholders of the business, now that could be represented by one individual sometimes, a wealthy individual that might own a facility, or it could be a business, a company that owns multiple facilities. So there are differences, but in both cases, the decision-making structure, the governance structure, has to be right. As we all progress and move forward through our careers in the golf industry, we will have seen good and bad examples of decision-making in both of these types of clubs. It is completely unfair to say the committee structure in an equity club is a poor governance model. It is completely unfair to say, a single owner makes the right decisions all the time, because they frequently don't, I'm afraid. Just because you have the wealth perhaps to own the facility doesn't give you the knowledge. And I was delighted to hear in Eric's introduction the commitment the AGIF are making towards education and professional development, because the knowledge should sit with you, ladies and gentlemen, the industry professionals that work, and owners and the volunteers, those members and the commercial owners that operate and are responsible for clubs should be seeking the advice of you, the professional team. It's also right that to say that just because governance, or does golf governance only apply in a club environment? We know there are 4 business models, and yes, governance is absolutely vital in a private members or semi-private members club, but it equally applies if you're a pay-and-play golf course or a golf resort of some type, or it could be a tennis club or a country club, a yacht club. These are all different types of operating models, but they all need a good and effective governance structure. So please, when I talk about boards and committees, it doesn't necessarily just apply to a private members club. Think about how that might work and apply in your own circumstances. A good governance structure will future-proof your club, because a good golf club governance structure will make sure that the right committees and the right decision makers are constantly reviewing circumstances, are constantly striving to improve. How can we do that better, more efficiently? How can we build the business? How can we grow our operations? And a poorly managed or poorly governed club will struggle to grow, because effectively there is no structured decision making. You might get somebody who wants dramatic change, who wants to go in a completely different direction, but that may not be the right decision. And I've seen clubs, and I've worked at clubs where poor decision making has led to the facility struggling and failing to grow, when more collaborative decision making would have been better, and a better governance structure would have been applicable. And my final point there is that obvious one. Our members in a normal world, perhaps not in the last 12 months or so, but in a normal environment, our members will travel a lot, invariably. They will have had experience, and if they don't personally travel, they will have friends and they will have contacts with. And with our wonderful friend, the internet, they will have expectations of what their membership of their club or their golf experience should be at the club that you're operating. Their expectations are high, and they will have their own views. Now, it's great that people have views, and it's also, in my opinion, it's great that in a private members club, there are members willing to step up and say, yeah, I'm going to volunteer my time and get involved and serve on one of the committees. That is terrific. It's our job as professionals and managers in the business to ensure that those volunteers know what the role that they are expected to do, and they have the facts at their disposal when it comes to the decision making that they're going to be faced to make. Now, when you have a well-governed organization, and this may apply to many of your facilities today, when you do have one, what does it look like? For me, the best way to measure effective governance is to say, is the decision-making transparent? Can anybody in the business, whether you're a member of the club or one of the managers, department heads, or indeed some of the more junior members of the team, can they say when a decision is made, they know who made that decision and why? Because frequently, you know, things are handed down from on high, and you say, well, who made that ridiculous decision? Why are we doing this? And if there's no transparency, it invariably points to a poorly governed facility, in my opinion. Boards and committees must be focused on the business, not in the business. Now, there's a big difference there. And, you know, it's a very subtle play on words, but it is a big difference. Boards and committees should not be getting involved, and discussions should not occupy their time about the business operational issues. They should be focused on what the business is doing. Is it achieving its targets? What should its targets be for the future? And concentrating more on its strategic requirement rather than its daily or weekly tactical issues. And that comes from everybody knowing their role, volunteers and employees. Now, I would imagine that there are, across Asia, a number of facilities where people are employed to do jobs, and they may or may not have contracts. Most will have contracts, I'm certain. And certainly the higher up the organization you go, a contract becomes more and more important. So in the employee side, you know, generally, it's for you to decide whether this applies fully in your facility, but generally the employees have proper knowledge of what their role is. There's usually a contract, there's usually a job description, there's usually a clear understanding between the employee and their boss, whoever that is, what their job entails. But volunteers, do they have the same level of detail about what their role should entail? In the majority of cases, I would think not. If your club has proper equivalents of job descriptions for volunteers, well, fair play to you. Well done. Fantastic. We'll talk a bit more about that as the webinar goes on. But if your club can tick these three boxes, there's transparent decision making, your boards and committees have the strategic outlook, and everybody knows their role in the organization, then you've got a club that is governed well, in my opinion. I hope that's okay. I am indebted to my great friend, Dick Copland, for this wonderful phrase. I first heard this from the CMAE at one of their conferences when I went to one of Dick's sessions at the World Conference. And I think it's probably the most important 6 words that a club manager and the club can adopt to make sure they're successful. Boards govern, managers manage, members enjoy. And I've done this before. I've printed that out. So I've taken those 6 words, I've put them, you know, on a screen projected on the wall of the boardroom. I've put them on tent cards on the table in front of the delegates, and you know, place it around the building, especially in committee meetings and boardrooms and places like that, to constantly remind people of what their job is. And if we think that boards can manage, if we think that managers can govern, then we know that's a recipe for it all to go horribly wrong. Equally, members try to manage, members try to govern. No, this is not their role. Their role is to enjoy their membership, enjoy their club, enjoy their friendships, enjoy their golf, or whatever they're doing. They elect people in a members club environment, in a private members club. They elect people to the board, and then their role is to govern. Their role is not to manage. And that's fine. But to all the managers on this webinar, I would caution them to say, managers cannot govern, they should not govern. The moment a manager starts to set strategic policy, sets long-term direction, starts to be or try to be the board member that's supposed to be making these decisions, it can lead to problems. And therefore, I would say managers, by all means, should be advising their board, should be making recommendations to the board, should be arguing what their views are to the board, but the board ultimately must make the decisions whether it's in a members club or in a commercial club. So even in a commercial club, even if that board, there's one single shareholder of the business and he owns 100% of the shares of the business, they will still have a financial advisor. They'll still have a marketing advisor. They'll still have you as the general manager, perhaps, or the management team on that organization. And they should be advising that individual and providing advice. Ultimately, that shareholder or group of shareholders are tasked with making the tough decisions. But you should be advising them, and not, unless you happen to be a shareholder yourself, you should not be trying to step into the shoes of the board, of the governor. And so this is a very important thing, and I urge you, if you write nothing else down from the whole of this webinar, scribble those 6 words down and use them throughout your business. In a well-governed club, the board should only be responsible for these 6 areas of business. Now, these are important and significant areas of business, but they should only really be responsible for policies, for making sure that all the different policies that you would need to have, from who becomes a member and how they apply, the subscription rates and the fees they charge, etc., policies on employment, policies on environmental best practice, all sorts of these policies that you would have in your business, HR and compliance policies, they should all be agreed by the board. Now, always the professional management team should be feeding changes, adjustments, improvements to those policies up to the board as and when they need to do that. But the board should make the decision. The board should set the standards. If you're trying to be a 5-star golf facility or country club or resort, then the board should define the standards that say this is 5-star. Equally, you might say, no, we're not 5-star, we're 4-star or even 3-star. That's fine. Define those standards, document them, write them down. That's what the board should be doing. Strategy and direction. What are we trying to do? Where are we trying to go? How are we going to get there? Approving budgets and financial and capital expenditure. Absolutely, this is a key function of the role. Overseeing the financial management month by month. There should be perhaps monthly management reports from the management team, monthly financial reports. So this is a key function of the board. And the final one is it should hire a general manager. That is all, in my opinion, a board should do. It should not get involved in other activities. Managers, however, are therefore responsible for implementing the policies, the day-to-day management, the club operations, the delivery of the service standards that the board have already set, you've already documented, you've already discussed those, and the supervision of all employees and contractors. It goes back to Dick Copland's message. Boards govern, managers manage. Here we've defined it. Now, there may be individual circumstances at individual facilities where a general manager does additional jobs, or where a board might want to take some responsibility. But I'd urge you to suggest that in a well-governed club, these 2 slides, the last one and this one, are the core basics of what you need to ensure that you do as a manager and the board does And as long as they understand those roles and agree to those and stick to them, then you should be good to move forward. So, how can we implement effective governance in our club? Well, many of you might be saying, "Oh, this is great in theory. This is terrific. I'd love to work at a club that has a governance structure like this, but this is not. I don't see this in my club today. How am I ever going to get my owner, my board, my committee to change and to agree to this?" Well, I fully accept this is probably one of the biggest challenges that a general manager might face at a golf club. But, and you can only really do that when there's a willingness by all stakeholders to make a change. But look for, either in your recent past or at some point in the business of your club, an incident or a problem that might trigger a discussion. I think we've all experienced something went wrong. A person overstepped their mark. Somebody. I had it once where somebody spent money that they shouldn't have done. They placed an order for an expensive piece of kit without proper authorization, and the club were committed to take it, and we honoured it and did it. But we had some serious discussion with the individual about responsibilities. That triggered in the board for me a need to review the governance structure, and it was a perfect excuse to implement some changes, to say to the board, well, in many ways, yes, the person was wrong for spending money that they had no authorization to do, but it's possibly our fault for not documenting what their responsibilities were and who should have been making this decision. So, the fault can lie potentially with the structure, the board. And therefore, so look for this incident or problem at your club. It might have been something, we've all heard stories in golf of club captains and club presidents, for their year of office or their 2 years of office, they come in and demand that they want to build a bunker somewhere, or they want to fill a bunker in, or we've all heard those stories, many of which are true, I'm sure, but some of which may not be. But we've all heard those stories. And if that's something that's happened at your place, this is the issue that might then trigger you as the manager to say to your board, ladies and gentlemen, I think we ought to have a look at our governance structure. I think we ought to undertake a review and see if we can improve our decision-making process. And if the board agree, then you've got the ability to start saying, okay, what can we change? What's right? What are we doing? And here, in the content of this webinar, is a model you might be able to follow. I hope that makes some sense. Now, just before we go on to part two, perhaps we just take a little break. See, Eric, any questions so far, or anything that's struck anybody that you feel we might want to discuss before we go on, rather?
Not as of yet. I'm sure people are just digesting things. I know I have a few questions, but I think I'll hold off to the end. It's very interesting, Jerry. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Either they're holding up all the questions for the end, or they've fallen asleep. Hopefully they haven't fallen asleep.
I doubt that seriously.
But anyway, we'll move on and give plenty of time at the end. I hope that was self-explanatory. And that outlines what good governance is, in my opinion, and the instance and the responsibilities that you need to look at. Now, these four components are very important. I'm going to do them one at a time. And the first one is that you must have terms of reference for the board and all of your committees. The terms of reference, it's a fairly standard document. I'm sure many of you have already got some of these in place. But if you haven't, you need to write them. And the terms of reference should clearly design the purpose and objectives of that board or committee, who sits on it, how they're elected, their term of office, what happens if one of them resigns, what happens if somebody decides they've had enough. You have to put that in there. And then who does this board or committee report to, and to whom is it accountable? Very important that, because you could say, you set up a, not just here in the UK, but I'm sure around the world, and I know in the States it happens quite a lot, that clubs set up a Greens committee. Golf clubs love Greens committees. Somebody, a group of volunteers who think they can set policy and strategic direction, and indeed instruct your superintendent on how he should maintain the golf course. This is a particularly good example of a committee that needs a very strict term of reference. It needs to clearly say what it's responsible for and who sits on it. People who think they know a lot about golf course maintenance want to sit on this type of committee to try and exert influence. But your club should define who sits on this committee and what their purpose and objectives are, and who do they report to? Who is the accountability here, isn't it? Who are they reporting to? The board? Are they reporting to the general manager? My last club, I had a Greens committee that reported to me. And this was, I had my superintendent, myself, my professional, all three of us employees, my deputy. So there's 4 employees on the committee and 2 members of the club. And that's all. And so there was input from the membership through these 2 individuals. But, I chaired the committee. I was effectively the chair of Greens. But effectively, that was everything that was done by my superintendent and his team. And I was responsible for the board. And the main reason the board at my club wanted that Greens committee to report and to be under me is they saw it as an operational committee. They saw it as a committee that there should be some member input to receive member feedback. And I saw it as particularly important to communicate what the course team were doing, course maintenance team were doing to the membership. So theirs was more a liaison role between the membership and the committee and the management team. So we could explain that there's hollow coring going on, we're top dressing next week, we're improving the bunker, we're doing these, whatever the team were doing. And that those members help that liaison role. But there could be other committees. There could be finance committees, there could be membership committees, there could be strategic planning committees, there could be all sorts of committees in the club. Each of them should have this clear terms of reference. This is job number 1 and a key component number 1 in good governance. You can set up a simple template on an A4 document, have these 3 or 4 sections down, and then write one for each. It shouldn't take you that long if you haven't got them already. Once they're documented, get them agreed by the board, and then you can implement them. Second component of good governance, role descriptors for volunteers. This is where we start getting more challenging. But this is so important, in my opinion, because if somebody is volunteering to serve their club and they're not given any guidance, not given any rules of the job, they're not told, this is your job, this is the responsibility, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. They are free to put their own interpretation on it and therefore believe and change that their role, which may be different from predecessors. I've seen so many committee people come on saying, well, I have the time, so I can do a lot more than my predecessor, and I want to do this and I want to do that. One general manager friend of mine recently told me that when his club captain was about to change, few weeks before the handover, the incoming captain walked into the general manager's job and office and said, which is my desk? You know, which desk do I have when I become captain? And he said, you don't. Oh, I thought I'd be here. You know, I'm planning to be here, you know, 4 or 5 days a week working away. Doing what? The man had no idea of his role. The individual, you know, heart in the right place, well-meaning, absolutely. But the individual was going to put his own particular slant on the role as he saw it, rather than there be any documented reference to say, this is the role that we're asking you to take. So a role descriptor, not a job description, because you're not, when you volunteer, you're not taking a job, you're not being paid anything. So it's a role descriptor. It should clearly outline the roles and responsibilities so they know what is to be expected of them. And this is given to them before they take office. When somebody puts their name forward for election, when somebody walks into the office and says, you know, I'd like to volunteer and serve on one of the committees, you know, how should I, you know, how I go about doing that? How do I put my name forward? Well, the first thing you should do is perhaps read some of these role descriptors so that you can say, yeah, I'm happy putting my volunteering myself for this role, knowing as I do what it entails, rather than you be given no guidelines at all. It stipulates in this role description to whom they will be responsible. They're not just free to do anything they like. They are going to be accountable to somebody. They are going to be responsible to somebody. It could be the chair of that committee, or it could be to the board of directors, or it could be to some other organization, a person in the organization. It outlines the key objectives. Your role in this committee is to help achieve this objective. And by having that role descriptor, and I've got examples of role descriptors I can share with you. By having that role descriptor clearly agreed beforehand, then it's given to the individual before they commit themselves to stand for election or nomination to that committee. They know what is to be expected of them. Now, the board may wish to tweak these from time to time, and that's fine. But essentially, once the board have agreed these role descriptors, the individual who is putting themselves forward to serve on this committee does not get the opportunity to change this role descriptor. If they say, oh, you know, this needs changing or that needs changing, they will then have to go through the process of, through the general manager to the board, asking for the role descriptor to be changed. And that might get rejected, that might get approved. Maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's something that's been forgotten. But the role descriptor is effectively in stone. And in the same way that when any of us have applied for a job in the past, and you're at the interview and somebody says to you, you know, if you took this job, this is what you'd be paid, this is what you'd be expected to do, here's a full role job description for you as to what we expect you to do, this is to whom you'll be accountable. You know what you're letting yourself in for, and you either say, yes, I accept the job on that basis, or sorry, no, I can't accept that on the terms offered. So that you have the same philosophy and the same action plan for volunteers. You have a role descriptor. It clearly says this is your role, and that is given to them and they are told very clearly that if they stand for election, they will be expected to adhere to this role descriptor and respect it. If they don't respect it, they'll be told that they will be expected to resign. And I'll come on to that in a second, because there's two more key components to this effective golf club governance model. The third is all of this that I've been talking about should be documented. Whilst you may have a clear idea in your head or in the head of the president or the board, if that is not put to paper, then there is still room for confusion. There is still room for personal interpretation, for debate, for misunderstanding. So I earnestly suggest that you create a governance handbook. This will be a document you can print in your own. This is nothing, you don't have to be a book. This is just something you can use on your own photocopying machine inside the club and create it. And it's got everything in one place. All the people should have it who are in the governance structure today. So your officials, from your president downwards, your committee members, and all the members of the management team should be given a copy of this book. Because then it says, I know my role descriptor and I know the roles and responsibilities of others, if they care to read it. So it is all there, documented in black and white. Everybody knows their roles, and everybody knows everybody else's roles. And they are not free to add their own interpretation of what they think the role should be. They are not able to change that without reference up to the board, who are the ultimate and only committee that can change what's in the governance handbook. So what are the contents of this book? Your terms of reference for all the board and all the committees should be there. So some clubs will have many committees. I know, some that will have 10, 12 or more committees. And so therefore each of the terms of reference would be in this book. Many of you will know, and if you've heard speak, a very good friend of mine called Mike Leanhouse, former GM, Chief Operating Officer of Congressional Country Club in Washington, and a few other clubs as well. And when I saw him at Washington, he said he has 28 committees at the Congressional Country Club, 28 committees. And if he didn't have a handbook clearly stating the different roles and responsibilities of each board and committee and how they fitted into the overall structure of decision making, it would have been chaos, complete chaos. And so this book, this handbook, including all the terms of reference for all your boards and committees, is important, very important. It should outline in this handbook a document saying how we recruit. And now there may be a formal process at your annual general meeting of people who come onto the board, and in a proprietary organization, recruitment to the board should be clear as to who gets to invite people to come onto the board. Now that may be the responsibility of the chairman or the shareholders, but it should be documented. How volunteers get recruited to these committees should be there. The role descriptions for all the volunteers should be there in this book. So when you're reading it, you can see, oh, I know we've got a club captain or a club president or a club treasurer, or we have chair of Greens committee. I know what their job is. I know what they're responsible for, to whom they're accountable. Everybody can read it. It is clear and understandable. There should be as well what I call a volunteer induction checklist. Simple thing, simple tick box list of things that when you first get to serve on a committee or a board, there's a checklist of things that you need to be given, to be shown, to happen when, and before, ideally, if you can, before you take office. I used to do board inductions at my last two clubs that involved probably a full day, one-to-one, between me and my new board member. And I tried to do that if the AGM meant that they were definitely going to get in, for example, you know, there are some club AGMs where there's 2 vacancies on the board and there are only 2 people standing for them. So in that circumstance, before the AGM, you know that you're going to get on, so you can do the induction before. But if there's 2 vacancies and 4 people going for them, you don't know which of the individuals will be elected, then you do it immediately after the AGM. You know, I would go to them at the end of the AGM when the chairman broke the meeting up. I'd walk to the 2 individuals who have been successful, congratulate them on the election visit, and say, I'm going to call you first thing in the morning and we're going to book a time within the next week when we can do your induction. And that will take, you know, a day of your time, a half day of your time, whatever you feel you need with them. And ideally, that should be prior to their first board meeting. Now, you may not have the time to do that, so it's sometimes quite tight. You might therefore wish to pre-warn all 4 candidates that the induction will happen on this day and they should make themselves available for it if they are elected. But an induction, you know, covers everything. It covers everything from you walking them around the building, the facilities, meeting the staff, seeing the superintendents, doing all the back of house areas that, you know, as a member, they would never have got to see. I think the volunteer induction is important, and the higher, depending on their responsibility, if they're a board member, then they see everything. If they're just being volunteered and they got elected to the Greens Committee, maybe they just see the greenkeeping facility and the maintenance sheds and meet the greenkeeping team, you know, that type of role. It really depends on the role. But induction of those new volunteers is important, and the checklist that they have to do and have to be given and walk through should be in this handbook. And then the final bit is what I call a charter of responsibilities. Now, I've got an example of a charter of responsibilities here. And if you have a look at this, and this is just an example, you would be able to write this fairly quickly. You can copy it. And if anybody wants an example of this that they can take, I've got an Excel, this is on an Excel spreadsheet, so I'm happily email that to anybody if you want it. And clearly it just says what is the activity on the left, who's responsible, and what does somebody just provide input? Do they develop it? Are they responsible? Or do they make recommendations? They make decisions? It's all here. And so it is clear in this one, hopefully you get it on one A4 spreadsheet, the main issues. It's not everything. So in other words, you're not going to have an activity down the left of who's going to make the coffee this morning. You know, these are the serious decisions of running the business. Who is responsible for that? Which board, which committee, which individual, and what is their role within that, making that decision? I think a charter of responsibilities is something we copied from our friends in CMAE with their support and agreement, I must quickly add. And I think it's a great chart, and you can have this, everybody should have it. It should be in their governance handbook. It should be clearly outlining and describing the main activities of the club. So that's number 3 of the 4 key areas of activity for good governance. The 4th is that everybody involved, all the volunteers must sign a code of conduct saying they will agree to follow the role descriptor that they've been given and behave and accept the will of the majority decision-making by committees. So effectively, any committee, any board should follow the principle of democracy and say that, you know, the majority of the view should prevail. So if in a committee of 8 people, 6 people feel one way, their view should prevail. And the other 2 people, however they may well argue an opposite view, and in the debate, in the committee room, they should argue as passionately and as fervently as they wish to for their point of view. But when push comes to shove and a decision is made, if their argument is not accepted, those individuals have 2 choices. One, to remain on the committee and respect that they lost and the other view prevailed, so that they have to say, yeah, fine, I accept the view of the majority was opposite to my own. Or if they feel that they can't continue, they still feel passionately that the rest of them got them wrong, they cannot leave that meeting and then go and criticize the committee of which they're a member for making a decision that they didn't agree to. So they have to step away, they have to resign. And this code of conduct clearly says that all board and committee members should agree to act honestly and with integrity at all times, maintain confidentiality of discussions in meetings. There's such an important one. How many times you have a confidential board meeting and the person walks to the bar and sees his mate that he plays golf with and says, oh, we just agreed to do this, we just agreed to do that, we had a discussion. And you're thinking, what's the point? They've got to agree to sign a written declaration that they will maintain confidentiality of discussions, respect the wishes of the committee and support a majority decision even if they voted against it, and resign if they cannot agree with collective responsibility. Boards and committees make decisions. Chairmen of boards do not make decisions. They make it collectively or they don't make it at all. And therefore, you've got to be able to know that your committee members, when they go to their friends at the bar or they're playing in their regular 4-ball with their golfing pals, they say, the committee made this decision, not I made this decision, or the committee made a decision, but I disagreed with it. This is all fundamentally wrong. And if they did that, you or your chairman or the chairman of this particular committee can go to that individual and say, you signed this declaration saying you wouldn't do this. So you have a choice. You either agree to stop and behave properly, or you step away, you resign. And this is powerful. The signed code of conduct is powerful. It wasn't a very pleasant experience to go through, but my own, one of my clubs, will remain nameless, the chairman of the board himself breached the code of conduct. And the rest of the board were very upset, but he was chairman. And after some consultation, they confronted him, saying, you signed this code of conduct, you're the chairman of the club, the figurehead of the elected membership, and you yourself broke the code of conduct. He was given no choice other than to resign. And as sad as it was important, because what's the point of all this? What's the point of having good governance if people are just going to ignore it? So the code of conduct is the final item. And I've got an example. I say there's lots of stuff coming to you by email after this session where you can draft your own code of conduct from a template that we'll supply if you're interested in doing this. Now, this is not easy to persuade somebody to have this code of conduct. This is here. This is not easy to go to an existing board that's functioning perfectly and saying, gentlemen, ladies, gentlemen, you've got to sign this document. This will come back in your face. So be careful. But as I said earlier, if an incident happens, something happens at your club that causes you to say, is our decision-making process as good as it can be? Something has gone wrong. Somebody's overstepped the mark. You know, your club president wants to fill in that bunker again. He's outside his scope of responsibility. Then this gives you the chance to say, fine, let's have this handbook. Let's have these terms of reference. Let's have role descriptors for all the volunteers. And let's get them to sign that they will adhere to it and follow the process that we've outlined. So you might have to, in some cases, wait a few years before this comes up. And I think I would certainly say, don't run away from this webinar and tomorrow start implementing all these types of things. You may be at a club where you've already been through that instance, or you're going through it right now, because there's an incident that's happened, something has happened. And in which case this is possibly one of the reasons why you've logged into this webinar and you want to find a solution, then you can do it. If your club is functioning perfectly well and there are no issues at the moment, sit on this, don't do anything with it. But when something happens, or your board say, we ought to review the governance structure, then hopefully here's a template you can follow. And on that particular note, as I draw towards the end of this particular bit and we get into the Q&A bit, I'm going to send to you, ask Eric if he would kindly send to you this guide. England Golf here in the UK is the governing body. It's the federation, if you like, for golf in England. And along with their colleagues in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, have produced this governance guide for golf clubs. I have a hard copy here, but even better than that, wherever you are in the world, you can download it from the internet. So I've sent a PDF copy to Eric, and with his help, we can ask him to circulate it. Now, in this guide, there are role descriptors. You can see that, the role guidance. There are templates, there are guidance. There's a whole range of various things that you can download for templates to use, a whole range of stuff. So it's a very good document. And perhaps I'll tell you where this came from, this document came from. Properly to go back, it was actually September 2011, so 9 years ago, when I was CMAE's Chief Executive Officer. I was absolutely privileged to attend the CMAE's Leadership Conference in Washington, DC in America. And at that conference, the CMAE's Governance Review Committee had launched a new governance guide for the CMAE in America. And they'd done a lot of work in preparing a template for private clubs in the States. And a gentleman they'd engaged to help them do that was a gentleman called Fred Lachlan, who was a very nice gentleman who had been working for many years in the not-for-profit sector of PricewaterhouseCoopers. So he knew about governance in charities and other not-for-profit organizations. So he brought a lot of fresh thinking and new thinking. And this template was fantastic. And we had nothing in Europe, nothing at that stage. So I immediately went to Fred and at the end of his session and said, introduced myself and said, can we borrow some of this? And with the greatest of pleasure, he turned around and said, take it, use the whole thing. I'll send you it in a Word document so you can adapt it and use it. The more people that adopt this, the better. And effectively, that's what the CMAE did. I created a small committee in CMAE. We adapted the American document for Europe and made it so that it was a pan-European document. It didn't just apply to one country. But our friends at England Golf picked it up and have adapted it for England. So a lot of this document, when you read it, is based on the draft that I prepared along with others in the CMAE back in 11/12. And that was based on the CMAE's template. So I'm very grateful to the CMAE for starting this. So it has evolved and improved, and it's a lot better now than it was 9 years ago. So that's where it's come from. It's a great document, and it's full of stuff that you can do. You'll just have to adapt it to your own particular country's environment. Ladies and gentlemen, I will draw it to a close there. Happy to take some questions from Eric or anybody else. I hope you found it interesting, useful, and we'll continue as long as you wish on Q&A. Eric.
Thank you, Jerry. I found this fascinating. I mean, as a how would you say, a participant in a committee at a club, as a part of the AGIF who travels around and meets and discusses a lot of issues with a lot of general managers on private clubs and semi-private clubs, and also as an employee of a federation with committees. You know, as you say, it applies to all sorts of committees, and I found it really fascinating. I do have a few questions, but I will go to our engaged audience here. We have a question from Stephen Thilke in Kuala Lumpur. And he says, in your opinion, what is the ideal number of committees for an 18-hole golf club? You know, what would your advice be?
Well, I'd certainly say you need a board, board of directors. I presume this is a private members club. Is it a not-for-profit? Okay, so then you need a board of directors. I think you probably need a finance committee. You don't have to, but you may require a Greens committee. But as I mentioned earlier, we might want a Greens committee, which is principally, you know, the superintendent, your club professional, yourself, the general manager, and dominated by employees rather than dominated by members. You might want a strategic planning committee, you know, something that sets your board's vision for the future. That's quite important that you have a 5-year plan. So rather than occupy hours and hours of board time, you may wish to have a committee focused on strategic planning. Depending on your structure, you may wish a membership committee whose job is to ensure that new member applications are processed properly, and there are marketing plans and processes in place to continually recruit sufficient to replace those that inevitably leave. And that's probably about it. There will be others, as I mentioned, the congressional idea where you have 28 committees, and they had a social committee, they had a house committee, a bar committee, a wine committee, all sorts of people. You can go too far, I think. So I would think 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most. Depends on the size of the club, but I say congressional was 36 holes and it was 10,000 members, and it was a pretty big place. So you may have a number of them, but that's probably about it.
And just following up on that, as far as a percentage of membership base, if it's a private club, any hard and fast rules? I mean, some of them have higher percentages of participation. No hard and fast.
No, there's no right way to do this.
Yeah.
There's lots of different ways, and a question of what works. I think what I would add is, I'm surprised, maybe it's a question down your list, Eric, but how many people should sit on a committee?
Well, if you have any advice on that, I'm certainly there. Certainly.
Well, the first thing is many people say it should be an odd number, because you don't want to have 8 people on a committee and 4 think one way and 4 think the other. I take the opposite view. It can be any number you like, because if it is 4 and 4, if your committee is split on a discussion and they don't agree, the job of the chairman of that committee is to look for compromise, and do not, and if this is in your constitution or in your articles somewhere where the chairman has a casting vote, scrap it, get rid of that, because you do not want a situation where the chairman comes down, with one half, or has a casting vote that sets half of the committee against the other half. The chairman will then always be sort of, you were on their camp and you didn't like our camp. No, what should happen if it's split is the discussion should go on, it should be revisited, compromises should be, the proposal should be watered down so that the majority of the committee can agree to it. So, I therefore think it doesn't have to be an odd number. It could be an even number if you wish. Now, the second thing is how many in the committee. Now, there's clearly a very good argument that the fewer people on the committee, the more efficient it can be, because if you had 15 people around a table, generally they will all want to say something at some point. So this is going to make for long meetings, and I don't have to tell any club management professional the dangers of lengthy committee meetings. So certainly I would probably say up to a maximum of 10 is ideal. But I would say more than 5 or 6. The problems with having small committees of, say, 3 or 4 people is that what if one were ill or could not attend a meeting for whatever reason? You're putting a lot of responsibility, depending on which committee it is. If it's the social club committee or the wine committee, maybe it's not so problematic that only 2 people make the decisions, there are 3. But if it's the board of directors and there's big financial capital expenditure decisions to make, you do not want too much power in too few people. So it's somewhere probably between 6 and 10 are good numbers, efficient numbers for a committee, depending on its function.
So 5 or 6 committees, and of 5 to 6, as you say, you can't cookie cutter, but as a term of reference. Yeah. Great. We have a couple of questions from Ross in Hong Kong, and he asked a question in the midst of your presentation on, would you recommend having volunteers signing to say they understand and agree to follow the role descriptors before they join the committee? So obviously he was ahead of, you described that in quite good detail. Yes, as a strong recommendation. Then his follow-up, a few questions again from Ross. What advice would you give to a general manager who wants to introduce the idea of board, to set up board policies in terms of references, et cetera, et cetera? So I'll that's part of convincing the members to do this. So I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, as I said, it's kind of difficult to introduce this type of governance structure in a club that is operating efficiently and everything is successful, everything's rosy, and it's all very nice, because people say, why change? And there is a good school of thought to say, if it's not broken, why try and fix it? So I do understand that, but something will happen, or something may have happened in the past. Don't go back 40 years ago, something happened and we got it wrong. But if something happened in the recent past, that somebody overspent their limits of authority, or a poor decision was made, we decided to do this and it didn't work, we decided to something, an incident like that might allow the general manager to say to the board, ladies and gentlemen, we took that decision, it didn't work, we got it wrong somehow, whatever. Maybe we should be reviewing the way we make decisions, and a governance review might help us get our decision-making process more efficient. So look for that incident, look for that issue, the problem that you may have had, that will allow you to raise this, and then say to people, here are the benefits of good governance. And again, I'll just go back to this document that's on the screen now, the Governance Guide for Golf Clubs. In there is what's best practice in the industry. You've got to say to committees sometimes, and they will say to you, I've had people say to me, well, what are the other clubs doing? What's the best way to do this? How can we learn from what the other clubs have done? Why are they so successful and not us? All these issues will say to you, they've probably got something better in their governance, the way they go about the decision. So there's a whole lot of good reasons why you should do this and the way you go about doing it.
Yeah, I was about to mention, if you go to the CMA World Congress and you're meeting your peers or any other organization, especially United States, after 20 or 30 years of this, you can usually find a general manager who will be able to cite from prestigious clubs and might even be able to get one of their committee members to endorse the process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so they can go peer to peer to that very important member who is questioning this, and they say, well, we do this at this club, which is a peer club viewed out of the United States or Europe. And they do have, I think, governance summits in the United States for several years.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, have you had governance summits in Europe as of yet, or is that?
No, I wouldn't say that. This comes up as a conference subject at the CMAE conferences, right, and the national managers associations in each European country from time to time.
Right.
And myself and a number of others, help clubs steer people in the right direction. I do some consulting for a couple of clubs who've approached me and said, look, we've got a problem and can you help us? Can you walk us through? Can you hold our hand while we go through this process over a period of time? So I do that and would happily, we can do this remotely. The beauty of Zoom is we can do this remotely. So if anybody in Asia wants to help, just contact me and I'll be happy to help. But I think the main issue is that, let's go back to almost the very beginning, Eric, your AGIF adopting the CMAE's pathway in professional club management and professional development. Club governance is one of those 10 core competencies, isn't it? And we need, as managers, as professionals in the industry, to understand this subject. And it may well be that the club you're working for today doesn't want this or doesn't need this, but you'll move your career, you'll go on, or something will happen in the future, and you'll say, actually, this club needs a governance review, and we need to look at it. And this document and the things we've been talking about this morning may well help you then solve that problem.
Yeah, it is sort of the holy grail when you're talking to the managers. Then you want to get a hold of the owners or the committee members as well. So sometimes going through the GAs or some of the club captains organizations, that's what we try to do as well, with limited success at the moment. But it is fundamentally a huge topic.
Which is why we were delighted at the CMAE that England Golf, which is the largest golf governing body in Europe, of all the European countries, picked this up, and it's a fundamental plank of their strategy for growing the game and developing the game in England. And the Scottish Golf produced a similar. It's the same book, just a slightly different front cover, I think. And great that these golf unions and I feel sure I've been out of the CMAE for a few years now. I'm still a member, but I haven't been involved with the management of it for a few years. And I'm sure that the Swedish Golf Federation and the German Golf Federation will have their own equivalents of this. And if they don't, they should have. That covers that volunteer side, doesn't it? The club presidents and the club captains and these people are involved very much in the federations and the unions, the golf unions around the different countries as governing bodies, and they will know themselves that governance is important. Just as an aside for that, one of the reasons why England Golf put this as a central plank is in order for England Golf to get any government funding from the government sports minister, there was a condition in there saying that taxpayer money would only be given to those sports who promoted best practice in governance and adopted it themselves in their own organizations. So there may well be countries around Asia that say, they will enjoy, those golf federations might enjoy some public funding, and usually one of the conditions is that the people involved in the decision making, where that money goes, how it is spent, have a proper governance structure to ensure that they're making the best decisions possible. So,
well, it is a huge opportunity. I mean, and it does come up. So I think we'll be taking a look at possibly working with you and the CMAA to look at governance and then distributing it very much to the local GAs or the club management associations around Asia. Would be
absolutely, yeah.
perfect.
Happy to
Ross
help.
has another question. He says that, Jerry, what's your view on length of terms for volunteers and committee members?
Length of terms, great question.
Yeah, very interesting.
Not too long. And I like the ones that work out mathematically. So what I mean by this is you might say, for example, we have a board of 6, 2 of whom step down each year. And obviously the maths says, therefore, they do a 3-year term and then they step away. Your rules may permit somebody who's done 1 term to do a 2nd term, but perhaps like the President of the United States, they only do 2 terms and then they must step away. These are the typical type of rules. So I like the ones that fit in maths. If you had 8 people and 2 people step down each year, they will obviously do a 4-year term. That's how it would. So I like those simple numbers that make it easy. The difficulty would be you have a committee of 8 and they do a 3-year term, because then you've got to figure out, oh my goodness, somebody's going to do 3, somebody's going to do, 2 step down 1 year, 1 another year, and then none the year. Oh, it's a mess. So think of the maths, and I would therefore, say if it is a committee of 6, you could do 2-year terms and 3 step down. But the problem with 3 stepping down out of 6 in a year is half the committee. You should avoid changing, or your rules should avoid changing, making too many changes to a board year on year. You want continuity. So 2 stepping down out of 6 is about right. 1 out of 4 is about right to step down each year. These types of things. Would you want 3 out of 6 or 4 out of 8 to step down any one year? No, because the danger would be that 3 or 4 more people would come on new blood, and you've lost all the experience and the knowledge and the learning that the previous people have had. So, I would be saying, if you had a committee of 6 or 8, 2 step down each year, and they can do 3 or 4 years. You may allow them to do 2 terms back to back, but then say, thank you very much for your service. Time to step away. Let's get new blood. You want new blood. Do not keep the same committee for 10 years, same people on the committee, because the whole point of a club is that it will not progress if you've still got the same people making the same decisions they made 10 years ago. So you want fresh people. This is called evolution and progress. So you don't want to create a rule structure that permits change and encourages change.
Yeah, I mean, there are clubs out here, and I'm sure globally, that they change the whole committee every year. It's a wholesale change, or every 2 years.
Those general managers have my total sympathy.
Yeah, and so continuity you're recommending, and I've seen this structure before, obviously, is where you actually have a decent term, 3 years or 4 years, and then you do a rotational replacement so that there's continuity within everything, not too much of a change. Yeah, that's.
If you had your 8,
sense, doesn't it?
it makes eminent sense, I think. If you had your 8 and 2 step down each year, 6 are remaining, aren't they? And you only have to teach 2 people, the history, the backstory, if you like, before they come onto the committee, rather than, the danger of the whole committee changing is you lose all of the learning, the knowledge, and you have to start from scratch. This is what he does. This is what she does. This,
what the other committee did was just rubbish. Yeah, we're going to change direction.
Some bright sparky on the committee saying, "Why don't we do this?" Yeah, we tried that last year, and by the way, probably the year before and the year before that. No. So that's a very poor governance structure, and you need to find a way to have that change.
We have a question from Claire here in Singapore. And so what about when you're struggling for volunteers to join the boards and it makes it difficult to insist on a 3-year term, for example? So you got a club where you want committees, you want volunteers. how would you recommend the term
Well,
in that?
I'm going to go back to my Dick Copland slide. Boards govern, managers manage, members enjoy, and say that if you had a volunteer coming up, you should clearly say what's expected of them. We don't want you to become an unpaid manager of the club. We want you to come along to one meeting a month, give your advice, provide your energy, your passion for the club, and sit in a room for a couple of hours and then go back to being a member. That's all with the time commitment we're asking of you. And it should be no more than that. And if at your club, your volunteers do more than that because they have the time, well, maybe that's great, but their successors, whoever is going to succeed them, needn't do that. And in many ways, golf is one of those sports, and I'm sure the same is in tennis and lots of other sports, where it's played by people who have time on their hands. They're tired, or they whatever, self-employed, they've got businesses, and they say, I enjoy playing my golf and I want to play. You've got lots of time. So they're happy in some cases to volunteer and say, oh, I'll come along, for a couple of hours a day and do this, do that, do that. Now, okay, there is an advantage there that as a general manager, I'm getting free labor to do jobs, sometimes menial jobs, and the volunteers will happily do that. But the danger is that when that person says, I've had enough, I'm not going to do this anymore, you're not paying me, I'm out of here, you have then become reliant on that volunteer, and finding another one to give of that time will be difficult. So use your volunteers wisely. In your structure, be clear that their voluntary time is to attend a meeting and to give their advice, provide their knowledge, their passion for the club, and try and make decisions and help steer the club in the right direction. You're not asking them to do more than that. So I hope, Claire, that might help you, recruit a few more, or get a few more people interested, because you're not asking them to do that much. Hopefully you're not asking them to do that much.
Fantastic. Well, all the other requests have been upon your fine presentation material, which we've discussed, and all the other things that are clarified. So Jerry, I'd really like to thank you. That it's been a really fascinating presentation, really enjoyable. Enjoyed every minute of it, and really like to thank you for your time on this morning.
Pleasure.
Your time.
Absolutely delighted. I'm honoured that Eric invited me to give this presentation, and delighted to share my experiences and learnings with everybody. I hope there's some bits in there you might find useful. So look forward to the email with all the content. Yep. And I hope that the world will change sufficient that I can enjoy my next trip to Asia and come and see some of you.
We would welcome that, Jerry. It will come, and we'd love to see you out here. So let's anticipate that. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of your busy schedule. We hope it was useful. I think it was. You can see from the feedback. Just please continue to check the AGIF website for upcoming webinars. This is most likely our last one for the year. We've done 10 already. We want to make sure the schedule is full up starting 2021. It is a new year. I think the advantage of 2020 is we found that these type of webinars are very useful and very impactful. So we will continue to do them. And it certainly is gratifying to have people like Jerry and other executives to be able to come and share their information. So that's it for now. I'd like to wish all of you a great rest of the week and a weekend, and the rest of 2020. So thank you, and stay safe. Thank you very much.